when I see those people show up and say, hey, I found out what feels good to me and I asked for it in the bedroom and I'm getting what I want and I'm honoring my own pleasure and my own desires, that's what really makes me feel good. That makes me feel fulfilled, and that this work is really, really worth something. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Holly and I am a sex and relationship therapist, which basically means that I help folks who are struggling with creating their ideal sex life. Everything from sexual trauma recovery to erectile dysfunction to desire discrepancy, low libido, questions around sex and gender. The whole gamut of sex therapy is really what I do. And for this video today, I wanted to hop on and really talk about my origin story and why I became a sex therapist. And so some of that's going to include, my childhood, how my parents talked about sex or didn't talk about sex, some early experiences that impacted the way that I viewed sex and relationships, as well as some later academic adult working experiences that really caused me to want to focus on how do I help people live their ideal sexual and relational lives. So without further ado, let's hop right in and I'll tell you a bit about my story. So growing up, there really was no talk about sex. Interestingly, my parents, I think, were pretty lovey-dovey and it seemed like they had some sort of sexual relationship, but wouldn't directly talk to me about sex. And I learned very on that just wasn't something you talk about with your parents. So by the time my mom approached me about, do you know where babies come from? I was so uncomfortable. I had to be, maybe 10 at the time. I was so uncomfortable that I made up this story kind of just like to skirt around the question and get her to stop talking to me, because I was so incredibly uncomfortable with my mom bringing up sex by that point. But other than that, it was interesting because my parents, again, were very lovey. My dad would also sometimes wear some like inappropriate shirts. Like I remember he had this one t-shirt and it had golf balls on it with like a lipstick print and said something like, "Kiss my balls." And I remember knowing what that meant at the time when he was wearing it. And there's this discussion around the dinner table. And my mom said something like, at some point she's gonna know what that means. And again, because nobody was talking about it, I just pretended, I played the whole thing aloof, right? I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. La 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 la, let me eat my vegetables or whatever was on my plate at the time. So really, I grew up not talking about sex at all, and all the sex education I got was in 5th grade. We had that introduction to sex through health class, right? And it was mostly about menstruation and periods. By that time, my best friend had started her period in 4th grade, so I knew what periods were when we saw this video, a quick video in class one day, and that was really it. So I had no formal sex education like most of us, no sex education in home, and really just the silence around sex kind of taught me that sex was something that was shameful or not to be spoken about. And so really that's the story that I grew up with, not directly, but inherently. As far as culture or religious aspects, I grew up culturally, I am basically a mix of a bunch of white things. And so there wasn't much cultural influence there. And as far as religion, I did not grow up religious. My parents were not religious. I went to church a few times with friends, but again, not much influence there. Really, it was just the lack of any talk about it in the home that stood out the most. Something else that happened when I was a child which might seem unrelated, but is very much tied to my experiences regarding sex, and in particular regarding boundaries, was some loss and grief that I experienced early on. So when I was, this is gonna be a lot, so sorry, but when I was 1 year old, I had an older sister who was about 5 years older than me, and unfortunately, my sister died in a car accident when I was a baby. So I don't really remember her, but that was a part of my story growing up. And then by the time I was, I think, 5 years old, my younger brother, who was a year old, also died. So by the time I was 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old, I had already lost both of my siblings. And so I was the last remaining sibling. And so when that happened, a couple things happened. Number one, my parents became incredibly protective, understandably so, right? Like they had lost their children in 2 terrible freak accidents and wanted to protect me at all costs. You know, they wanted to know where I was at all times, down to what clothes was I wearing whenever I left the house, because my mom knew that if for some reason I go missing, that's what you tell the police, right? You have to tell them what were they wearing, and that way it helps them to identify you. So I grew up very, very protected, didn't learn to ride a bike for a long time just because I wasn't allowed to be out in the street alone. So I don't think I learned to ride a bike until I was in middle school. One of my friends taught me. So that's a part of my story. And the other impact that had on me is that because both of my siblings, so there were only 3 of us, that left me the remaining child, which gave me a sense, like an internal sense of survivor's guilt, and caused me to be a people pleaser, right? I grew up thinking my parents have been through enough. I need to be as unproblematic as possible. I need to make sure that I don't cause any waves because, again, my parents have been through enough, right? So what that did was really caused me to be a people pleaser, right? Caused me to do things to please my parents, whether it's grades or stuff around the house, things like that. And that bled into my other social life, right? So for one, I didn't have siblings anymore, so I didn't get much socialization growing up other than with the kids at school, which is great, but also it's not the same. And this people-pleasing demeanor and survivor guilt which caused me to make myself small and not really voice my beliefs or stand up for what I believe in or develop the ability to assert boundaries. And so all of that really, looking back now, bled into my later experiences in high school and college, in which I was not able to assert myself or assert boundaries that I had or tell boys no when they made sexual advances at me. And I certainly don't blame my parents for that, right? Like, looking back, they did the best that they could with the information that they had. They did their best to provide a good life for me. I was always well taken care of. I was always safe and protected. But looking back now, those are things that I wish I had learned, right? I wish I had learned how to say no. I wish I had learned how to set boundaries. I wish that I had dealt with the survivor guilt that I had. I wish I had learned that you can assert boundaries without disappointing people, without disappointing your parents, or without disappointing others in your life. And even if you do disappoint others in your life sometimes, that's okay, right? You have to do what's best to make sure that you feel safe inside, right? That you're asserting your own boundaries and honoring your own needs that make you feel safe. So as a parent now, you know, that's something that I definitely think about, right? How do I instill that within my children? And as a sex therapist, right, how do I teach my clients how to understand what their own boundaries are and not feel pressured to do things because either their partner wants them to or somebody else wants them to, just because they've been socialized to believe that their needs aren't important, or that making waves is a problem, right? By asserting their needs, that they are going to make waves, cause issues with the people around them. When really it's about just making sure that you're safe. So this people-pleasing nature and the lack of sex education certainly carried on into my adolescence and into high school. Again, in high school, we didn't get much sex education. I think there was one health class that was required, and all I can recall from this particular 1-hour class during health was a lot of pictures of genitals that were diseased, a lot of pictures to really like scare us away from having sex, because the message was, if you have sex, you will catch some STI or some STD, and this is what your genitals are going to look like, and that's bad. So really there was just some of that fear mongering that I think a lot of us got with sex ed growing up, and that was my experience there. Additionally, as I, was in high school, started experimenting, having crushes, again, that people-pleasing mentality and not knowing how to set boundaries really came up in my relationships. And so unfortunately, it caused me to be in a lot of relationships in which I didn't, A, know my boundaries, and B, know how to set them, and C, know how to tell people no. And so unfortunately, that put me at risk to experience a lot of different forms of sexual violence, some smaller than others, but that started as early as high school and carried on throughout college, in which I would be dating people who didn't respect my boundaries, who would push me farther than I'd want to go, who would coerce me, or just outright ignore when I finally did set a boundary. So that certainly has had an impact on myself as a person, and also myself as a now sex therapist. So throughout high school and college, I have these series of not so great relationships, and definitely not great sexual experiences, not sexual experiences in which my needs were ever prioritized, in which my pleasure was ever prioritized. And many non-consensual or straight up violent sexual experiences. And so towards the second half of my time in college, and I think it's also kind of important to mention, or interesting to mention, that when I started college, I was pre-med, I was a biology major, I was really interested in wanting to be a reconstructive surgeon. Helping kids with cleft palates, things like that, also into plastics. Dr. 90210 was a big show at the time, if anyone's around my age. So that's what I wanted to do, right? That's what I had gone to school for, and really started my career wanting to be a surgeon of some sort. And then halfway through my college career, I took a class in women's studies, or gender and sexuality studies as it became. And it was just a breadth requirement. And I will say I was very much not a fan even before going into it, right? I was almost anti-feminist. I was like, oh, like I'm gonna go into this class, people are gonna be burning their bras, like really ridiculous stuff, and really ignorant stuff, to be honest. And I took the course to fulfill the breadth requirement, and I was like, oh, I really like this stuff. And in particular, I really liked, exploring different facets of feminism, what it meant to be a feminist, right? I had done competitive cheer for my whole life, like what it meant to be someone who is like a cheerleader doing this stereotypically feminine thing, while also somebody who wants to have control of their own life, be able to make their own decisions, be able to be a career woman, do all these things that like the boys do or the men do. So I liked that dichotomy of things that I saw expressed in my gender and sexuality class. So I did this class, and I also, while I was continuing the other courses, I think I had taken 6 chemistry classes by the time I was like, this really sucks, right? Like, I do not like biology anymore. I do not like, well, I like biology, but I think I got burnt out on chemistry, and I was like, when do you ever go to the doctor and they pull out the periodic table. Never, right? So why are we continuing to go over this? And I just started to get bored and burnt out regarding that particular area of study. But I got really into the gender and sexuality stuff. So that certainly influenced my career as I started to pivot and take more of those classes and end up also majoring in gender and sexuality. So I'm in college, I'm exploring these different majors, and I'm also still working through my own process, healing from these abusive relationships that I had been in, and doing so in secret. Again, my parents didn't talk about sex, and my parents had been through enough. So, and their whole goal in life was to protect me, right? And so my biggest fear in talking to anyone, and in particular my parents, was that I would cause them to feel let down, that I ended up unsafe. So I kept that a secret for a very long time. I guess up until now, as I'm doing this video. So I was still doing my own healing and my own work, and in part of that healing and work, I saw an opportunity to do rape crisis advocacy at my local rape crisis center. And in doing that, basically my role was as a volunteer. You're on call for a certain period of time, and we would get calls through the Rape Crisis Center requesting an advocate to present at the hospital to help support or advocate for somebody who had recently been sexually assaulted and was going through a SART exam, or what's sometimes known as a rape kit, in order to gather evidence regarding the recent sexual assault. So that was something that I started doing volunteer-wise, right? I would get calls in the middle of the night, wake up, go to the hospital at midnight, stay there till the sun comes up, helping to just really be there for somebody who had just went through possibly one of the most horrific experiences of their life, and then to go through an exam, which can also be re-triggering. And so that work was incredibly rewarding. It was sad, right, to be a part of that work, but also incredibly rewarding to be basically like the first person that's there. And my sole job was just to support them and advocate for them, right? Give them information, sometimes be a hand to hold, tell them about the process, next steps. And in addition to doing that work where you show up at the hospital, another part of being a rape crisis advocate is doing shifts on their hotline where people can call, and it's really just like a phone job where people call and just have someone to talk through if they're having a hard time and they had been recently sexually assaulted. So that work is incredibly rewarding, incredibly important work, and if anybody is interested in doing that type of work, I strongly recommend that you look into your local rape crisis center and see how you can get started helping. So there I am, I'm in college and doing my undergraduate studies, and I'm also volunteering at my local rape crisis center, and I am working part-time doing retail, right? So I'm working at a clothing store during the day, doing my studies and doing the rape crisis advocacy. But I needed to make more money, and in order to get another job that was going to be during hours in which I was not already working, volunteering, studying, I got a job that was open overnight or 24 hours. So I started working the overnight shift at the adult toy store, doing adult retail. So basically a sex toy store. And there was also an adult arcade in the back. So that was another pivotal part of my experience in really driving me to be a sex therapist. So while doing that work, it was really my first experience getting to explore sexual pleasure, right? I got to do a lot of the trauma work that was really important to me through the rape crisis advocacy, but then working at an adult toy store, it's all about pleasure, right? It's all about pleasure and pleasure products. And I often joke that working at the adult toy store was my first taste of couples therapy, because I would be there and usually a couple or a cishet couple would come in and the husband would say, all right, we need something for my wife. She needs blah, blah, blah. And the wife would be there with an uncomfortable look on her face. And I would say, okay, great. You go ahead, husband, you go ahead and you go shop around here. I'm going to hang out with you, your wife, if that's okay. And we're going to see what she actually wants. And if we need you, we'll call you back. So really that was what I consider like my first taste of like couples sex therapy, helping not just couples, individuals as well, but helping people to feel comfortable talking about something that is really intimate, and to be able to explore pleasure. And I was really good with the couples and with the women, so I got to work mostly on Fridays and Saturday nights, which is when the couples would come in. So that was another big part of my journey in really defining me wanting to become a sex therapist. So bringing it all full circle, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to help people who have been through sexual trauma. I want to help them to alleviate any trauma symptoms, any PTSD that they're having. But what seems to be missing is like, okay, now what, right? There's a lot of people doing work in PTSD and sexual trauma recovery, but when do we get to start focusing on the pleasure and the fun stuff that I was seeing working in the adult retail scene? So I really got honed in on, this is what I want to do. I want to work at the intersection of trauma recovery and pleasure, helping survivors to not only overcome sexual trauma, but also to learn to trust their bodies and re-engage with pleasure again. Further reflecting on my own upbringing and my own journey, I started to really know what I liked. Working in adult retail allowed me to explore with products that were being given away and really find what felt good to me. And learning more about my body helped me to understand that my pleasure was important, and helped me develop the skills to ask for what I wanted in sexual experiences. And that was another thing that I wanted to be able to help people do, right? I want people to know what feels good for their bodies, to feel comfortable in their own bodies, and to be able to ask for what they want in the bedroom and prioritize not just their partner's experience, but their own pleasure in the bedroom. So bringing it all together, it was my upbringing, my lack of sex ed in the home, my lack of sex ed at school, my own trauma history, and lack of ability to assert myself, combined with going to school, understanding gender and sexuality studies, doing rape crisis advocacy, and topping it off with working in adult retail, that all combined to propel me to want to do this work and want to be a sex therapist, helping people to reclaim their bodies and have pleasurable, connected, intimate lives. And looking at things now, that is when I feel most fulfilled in my practice. When I see somebody who feels disconnected from their body, who feels shameful about their body, who feels like they don't deserve pleasure, when I see those people show up and say, hey, I found out what feels good to me and I asked for it in the bedroom and I'm getting what I want and I'm honoring my own pleasure and my own desires, that's what really makes me feel good. That makes me feel fulfilled, and that this work is really, really worth something. So if you're watching this and thinking about your own experiences, I really encourage you to reflect on how your history has shaped your sexual self and your sexual identity, right? Take some time to reflect on your cultural, religious, parental upbringing and how that influenced your views of sex and sexuality. Maybe reflecting on some earlier experiences, sexual or not, and how that might impact the way that you engage with intimacy and pleasure, and just really get a deeper understanding of your sexual origin story. And if you need some support with that, I'll be linking below a little guide just to better understand how your view of sex and sexuality came to be, really to encourage that self-reflection and examine how did my sexual self come to be? What is my sexual origin story? So if you're interested, I'll go ahead and link that below. And if while listening to this or watching this video, you heard things that resonated with you or were similar to your own stories, or maybe different, very different than your own stories, I'd love to talk more. Please do like this video, comment down below, and let me know what your experiences were. I'd love to keep this conversation going and really peel back the shame that a lot of us feel around our experience of sex and sexuality. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening to my story. And again, if you found this video helpful, please do like, comment, subscribe, or share this video with someone else whom you think might benefit. Until next time, stay connected, stay curious, and remember, you deserve a happy, healthy, and pleasurable life.